everyone. Again, my name is David Spihar with dRofus. Just real briefly about myself, and then we'll jump in to the presentation. So my background is in architecture. I'm actually a recovering architect myself. Before joining dRofus a little over a year ago, I was the design technology leader for Stantec. And Stantec is a fairly large enterprise client of dRofus's. And my background is architecture and BIM implementation. So I'm steeped in BIMness, I can say. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into a very brief presentation, talk a little bit about the company, about an overview of the software, and then the majority of this will be spent actually doing a demonstration. So as Michael mentioned, we are part of the Nemetschek group. Basically, it just means that we are part of a family of products that are really focused on the BIM workflow, and we're all really focused on this idea of supporting open standards and open BIM. So our tool, and you'll see as I talk through the demonstration, works with IFCs, Excel, etc., which then fits in very nicely with the Nemetschek philosophy. A little bit about dRofus. The funny name is a Norwegian acronym. So the software was developed in Oslo. Our development team is still located in Oslo. The genesis of the software was actually building owners very early on in Norway who were very progressive in their BIM adoption, that realized the importance of the data or the information in the BIM workflow, and wanted to take ownership of some way to be able to manage and validate the information on their BIM projects. You can see the software has been around for quite some time, fairly new in the North American market, but it has been around for quite a long period of time. This is our mission statement. I'll let you read this, but I think the really important thing to note about dRofus is that we are not a BIM authoring platform. We do not do geometry. So we're not going to compete with any of the other design authoring tools that you may use, be it Revit or Archicad, for instance. We like to say that we just make BIM smarter because we focus on the information. I think what is unique about dRofus, because there are quite a few collaboration platforms out there where we can view information from models. The part that is really unique to dRofus is that we have the ability to create that information in that collaborative environment. A lot of other platforms that are out there right now, they really are good at viewing information that is created from other sources, but we have the ability to create that and synchronize it across your project. Here's some of our larger customers in the North American market. You'll recognize most, if not all of these. Do want to say that we always want to show everybody all the really big clients that we have, but we are used in firms as small as 4 to 5 people. So we have various different pricing models to support different firm sizes, from a handful of people up to these very large international clients. As far as our markets are concerned, as you can see, we're pretty much in every market. There is a perception that we are for healthcare. We're not just for healthcare. That said, if you do healthcare type projects, we're awesome for that. And actually the data set that we're going to use today is a small health clinic. But even though there is that perception, it's really a valuable tool for every market sector. I mean, when I put on my architectural designer hat, I'm not aware of a single project I ever worked on that didn't require some level of planning and project information management, and that's really what we do. What's important about dRofus right now in the kind of the life cycle of BIM adoption in the industry is seeing a real shift in this focus on information. And I think that we've all seen the benefits of BIM or a model-driven workflow, but I think at the same time we're starting to realize that there are some inherent flaws to that workflow. And the flaw is that in the tools like Revit, for instance, you have to have geometry first in order to get the data to then validate that. And I think what we're talking about now in the industry, and I think what dRofus does very well, is this idea of let's create the data first, and let's validate that the data meets the project requirements before we start building models. So you'll see in the industry, people are starting to use Dynamo quite a bit, the concept of generative design. All of these are focused around creating information and then developing models off that information. And again, that's what we do really well. And really what dRofus can be, and hopefully I'll show this to you in the demo, is we really want to be your single source of truth for information throughout the project lifecycle. So as various team members will use different tools, the data is consistently hosted in a single location. So the way that dRofus works is we're built on a bunch of different modules, and the various modules support different activities depending on your role in a project environment. We're not going to go through all these modules today. What we are going to focus on is some of the more upfront design-focused modules because they kind of set the stage and they'll give you a taste of what dRofus can do throughout the entire life cycle of the project. But again, we're not going to focus on all of these. If there are specific modules that you have interest in, by all means, we can follow up later with those types of demonstrations. As I mentioned, we want to be that single source of truth. The way that we work, the way that the software works, we are a cloud-based solution. The way that our licensing is structured is that any single user on any organization collaborating on a project has access to the same shared information. And based on user permissions, people can just view or edit information based on how you define their access. But at the end of the day, what we want is we want to be that connection either through open standards like IFC. We do a lot of importing and exporting with Excel, but then we also have direct plugins to BIM authoring tools like Revit and Archicad. So ultimately, again, regardless of the tools that team members use, if they support open standards, we can essentially be that glue that holds that whole team together. The way that our software is deployed, it's pretty simple. There's a desktop application that gets installed on every user's machine. When that desktop application is installed, it will automatically install the plugins for the various BIM platforms. And then there also is direct access to some of the information through a web interface. And we'll show you all of those in today's demo. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and get into the demonstration. So I'm going to close this down. So you're looking at the home screen for dRofus. So when you log into your project, in the home screen, we just give you some high-level project information about some of the key information, some of the key metrics in a project, and you can see the users that have been involved in this project. Off on the left are all of the different modules. As I mentioned, we're not going to talk about all these today, but I'm going to start with the Rooms module. So if I select that and open the Rooms module, this is a user interface. It's fairly consistent throughout all the modules. Basically, you'll see that you've got your navigation pane on the left, you've got your ribbon on the top, your main workspace in the center, and then we have some dialog boxes out on the right. But basically, at the core of dRofus is rooms. And basically, the way that we work is you think about creating your rooms, defining where those rooms live inside of your building, and then defining what we call items, which an item in dRofus is anything that would go into a room: furniture, fixtures, equipment, mechanical, electrical items. You then take those items, you assign those items to rooms inside of your program, and then we synchronize all of that with your Revit models, and then you can build on that information. So in the Rooms module, you can see in the navigation pane on the left, you'll see that there's the functional structure. This is fully customizable by every project team. In this case, you can see that we have departments and in some cases sub-departments. Again, this can be customized, how these departments are named, numbered, the number of levels. You may have a multi-building project on a campus, so you can have a campus, each building, departments, and sub-departments inside of those. So again, this is completely customized and defined by a project team. But at the highest level, if I go to my project and I open up my area summation dialog, now right here at the highest level, I can see how my project is evolving. So I see every department, how many rooms are currently planned in that department, the programmed area, and the net area. Here's the BIM area rather is over here. Let me move that one over. So this has already been synchronized with a Revit model. So in this case, without even opening up Revit, a project manager, a planner, an owner, a contractor, somebody that's not working inside of the Revit models can very quickly see how a project is evolving. And how the model is evolving compared to the actual program. So that's at the highest level at the project area summation. I'm going to close that. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about a different department. So if I go ahead and select any of these departments, you can see that I quickly isolate all the rooms that have been assigned to that department. There are other ways of grouping rooms. We can group them by levels. You can create custom grouping queries. So basically, once you have all your rooms inside of your project, you can start to then create different ways of viewing the rooms and grouping them. But the most common way of doing it is inside of your departments. So if I do select my department and open up my properties palette, so now I'm seeing the properties for this department. And this is where I define the name and the number, the department gross and area net factors. So I can put in efficiency factors on a department by department basis. So now for very early planning and programming, before I even build a model, I can look at what my net areas per department are versus my gross requirements. So that's at the department level. One of the things that you'll see that is a common theme throughout dRofus is the ability to attach images and documents to just about anything that lives inside of your project. So in the case of our department, for instance, if I select my documents, you can see that I have a PDF here, and I'll go ahead and I'll open this up. And this PDF is the design guidelines for a dental office layout. So if you have your own standards, if you have a specific client that has their own specific standards, those can be attached even at the department level. So as your team is designing a project, they can see what requirements they're designing against. So that's my department. If I go ahead and select a room inside of my department, now it's showing me the properties for that room. You can see that this is very similar for those of you that work in Revit. This is very similar to the Revit room parameters, right? So we've got our room name, our room number. We can manage multiple room numbering schemes. I know a lot of people get really excited about that, so that if the owner has a defined number code, but as the architect, you want to have a specific number on the drawings, we can manage all those. In addition to those core attributes for a room, you also have the ability to create your own custom attributes for a lot of different reasons. In this case, we have different attributes that are tracking our program area versus our design area for every phase of the project. So basically at each submission, the schematic design, design development, etc., you can come in here and you can just basically manually transcribe over, or you can do this through an Excel import-export, where you can take a snapshot in time of how the program is evolving, and then I'll show you how we can look at some of that information inside of reports. So that's the core properties for a room. I'm also going to open up my room data interface. And when I open up the room data interface, this is where you now start to capture all of your design and functional requirements for your rooms. So these tabs, the fields of information inside these tabs, these are also customizable and defined by you. So if you have your way that you like to manage and capture room data, or if you have an owner that has standards of how they want room data sheets created, excuse me, all of this can be customized in your project. And you can see in here, we're capturing all these various pieces of information from the design build requirements to all the different mechanical, electrical systems. So that is the room data for this room. That's also the properties. I'm going to go ahead and actually just open this room. And when I open the room, you'll see that it's just another way of accessing the properties. It's another way of accessing the room data. We can also, though, see we have images. This is the floor plan image of this room that is coming from the Revit model. So again, if I'm someone that doesn't work inside of Revit, I can now see how my Revit model is evolving, and I'm the person that's doing the planning and programming, and now I have a direct connection between the two. You'll also see that we have these other headings here. These are what we refer to as item lists. So as I mentioned, and we'll talk about items next, as you create items inside of your database, you then assign those items to your rooms. And when you assign those items to the rooms, they're now tracked as part of those requirements for those rooms. So in this case, you can see that this is all the FF&E that is planned for this room. If I go to finishes, you can see that these are the finishes that are planned. So now the various team members can start to define their requirements inside of a single platform. So I'm going to go ahead and close that room information. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about items. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to take one step back. So, you know, obviously this is a project that's fairly far along. There's basically three ways that you can create a project inside of dRofus. You can create it natively right inside of the platform. So you can see right here, I can create new departments, new sub-departments directly inside of dRofus pretty easily. I can also add rooms. I can add them from templates, which we'll talk about in a moment. I can just add a new room. I can copy rooms. if I want to. So there's a very easy, efficient way to build your program inside of dRofus. We realize that not all teams work that way. I know that there's a lot of people that still really like working in Excel and they're comfortable in Excel. That's fine. We can import, as I mentioned before, we work with Excel all the time. So in our import-export utility, I can import rooms from an Excel file. And basically, I can take an Excel file and then I can decide which one of the attributes inside of dRofus I want to populate from columns of information inside of Excel. So it's very easy to bring this information into dRofus from Excel. The third way of doing it is to actually import all of this information or the relevant information from a Revit model. A lot of teams start with conceptual Revit models, doing some block planning layouts inside of Revit. If that's your workflow, when I get into the Revit plugin, I'll show you that we basically can decide which parameters inside of Revit you want to push inside of dRofus. So really there's three ways that you can get to the level of information that we're looking at right here. I'm going to talk about items now. So now I'm going to open up the items module. You'll see inside of the items module, the user interface is the same as rooms. You have the navigation pane on the left. Now in this case, this is how you group and organize all of the items in your project. So similar to the way that we group rooms inside of our functional structure of departments and subdepartments, etc., we now can itemize and define how we want to organize our items in a project. This is fully customizable as well, so you can have as many item groups and subgroups as you want. You can see in this case, we've got the item groups organized by FF&E, building elements, HVAC, etc., and then we have subgroupings underneath those. So again, any one of these groupings that I select, it's now isolating the items that have been defined to be part of that item group. So if I go into my equipment group, for instance, and if I go ahead and select this CAT scan, you'll see that similar to the room properties, here's now the item properties. Again, for those of you that work in Revit, this is very similar to looking at the parameters for a properties for a family. So in this case, I have my item name, other pieces of information, budget price. This one is great because you can actually put in a budget price for every piece of equipment that goes into your project or every item in your project. Every time that item is assigned to a room, we track that and you can report that. So now you can start to get very reliable budget kind of gut check pricing information based on your budget that you define for the items and then those items placed inside of rooms. So that can become a very powerful tool during design for doing some rule of thumb or just some, kind of cost validation, if you will. This other parameter or attribute I want to note right here is this to be modeled checkbox. This is where we decide how you want to relate items in dRofus to families inside of your Revit model. So if you want to make sure that this item lives as a physical piece of content and geometry in the Revit model, you select to be modeled. Now what's great about this is that this now allows teams to be more strategic in their modeling. I know a lot of people will model everything so that they can create schedules inside of Revit. I know I was guilty of doing that myself. But the reality is there's some stuff that you may not want to or need to model, but you want to track it and make sure it's part of a room. Well, in that case, you don't have to have that item checked to be modeled. So things like artwork or maybe a trash can, something that's not necessarily super dimensionally significant, but you want to make sure that those get purchased as part of your project. So we give you that ability to be strategic in what you want to model. So with this item selected, I'm going to go ahead and open up the item specifications or the item data. Now the item data, you can see that these tabs, again, this is basically similar to the room data inside of the rooms module. This is the item data inside of the items module. So now we can have as many tabs and as many fields of information that we want to start to basically create our item specifications. So that as I learn more about my items, I can add that information into my item specification. I'm going to go ahead and actually open this item. And when I open the item, you'll see that there's all of those similar tabs of information. So there's my electricity and data and so on. But also we have the ability to attach images and documents to items. So similar to rooms and departments. So if you have basis of design equipment, you can add images. You can add cut sheets from the manufacturer's website. So again, all of this information can be captured and stored with this item. Every time this item is assigned to a room, all of this information comes with it. So now you have this seamless connection between what has been designed and specified and what is actually going to be placed inside of the project. So I'm going to close that down. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about templates. So now if I open up the templates module, interface is fairly similar, but now this is a little bit different because if you think about templates, in this case, room templates, these live inside of the same database as the rooms in the project, but they are independent of the project's rooms. So basically you can manage templates, which are standards, and then you can assign those templates to your rooms in the project. So this is now a really useful tool if you are a design firm that has your own design standards as far as how you like to design healthcare projects or research labs or educational facilities, or if you have an owner, a specific owner that you work with on a regular basis and they have their own design standards of this is what their typical classroom looks like and the requirements. This can all be managed as templates, and then every project you create, you can associate these templates with the rooms, and I'll show you that in a second. So if I go ahead and I select one of these templates, in this case it's examination room, you'll see I'm seeing the properties for the template, very similar to properties for a room. If I go ahead and open this template, this interface is the same that you see for the rooms, although now instead of having room properties, these are properties for the template. So this is where you can start to standardize things like room codes, room names, standard areas. So you can standardize this in templates. In addition to that, you'll see here's the room data interface. So instead of now assigning room data on a room by room basis, I can assign it to a template, and then I'll show you how I apply this to rooms inside of the project. I can also attach images and documents. So in this case, maybe I want to attach an image that is the standard layout for this type of room. You know, whether it's from a design manual, hand sketches, anything that you can create an image file for, you can attach that as a standard image for your templates. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. In addition to my room templates here in the template module, you'll also see, as I mentioned, there were all of these other item lists. So now I can start to template the items that get assigned to rooms as opposed to just doing it manually. So in this case, if I go and open the template for my FF&E, so now I have a dental office FF&E template, and this says this is all the equipment from an FF&E standpoint that should be assigned to every single dental office. So now you can start to standardize not only your design and functional requirements for your rooms, but you also can standardize what goes into those rooms. You see there's FF&E. We also can do that at the finishes level. So I can start to template which finishes I want to associate with my rooms. All right. So I'm actually going to show you that now. If I go back into my rooms module, and I'll close down the room. Actually, let me keep the room data open here. So now if I go ahead and I select this handful of operatory rooms, and I'm going to go ahead, and you'll see as soon as I select those, my room data interface, it's going to show me that this hasn't been created. And by the way, you can also see that in my workspace, it shows all these columns of the status of these different item lists, or in this case, room data. And in all of these, it shows it hasn't been created. So for my room data, I'm going to go ahead and select Create from Template. And now it's going to bring up my room templates from the other module. I will scroll down and select this examination room and select that. And now you'll see that the status changed from not created to, interesting, it didn't seem, so now it shows change from not created to now it's being driven from a room template. So if I go ahead and double click to open this room, you'll see there's my room properties. There's now all of my room data, and you'll see that it's showing that this is coming from room template 030. My images now, there's the floor plan of this room that's coming from the Revit model, but there's also the image that shows the design standard. So now, again, as a non-Revit user, as a planner or an architect or a project manager, owner, contractor, anybody that needs to make sure that the models are evolving to meet the design requirements, they can see all that inside of dRofus without ever having to open up a Revit model. In addition to all of those, that information that's coming from the room template, if I select my FF&E or finishes, for instance, you'll see that it's showing me the status. They haven't been created yet. So I can create unique, which basically means I'm just going to define this as a one-off room, let's say a lobby or something like that. I can derive it from another template. I can copy it from a room, but in this case, I'm just going to create this also from a template. So now I'm going to go to my finishes, and I'm going to grab my dental office. And now when I select that, now all of those finishes that we've defined in our template, I can now push into these rooms. So it's a very efficient way to start to create your design requirements and then associate that with all of your rooms in your project. Um, One other thing I want to show you real quickly before I jump into the Revit side of things is that if I go ahead and I open up my room template again, we track every move that people make inside of the database, which is super handy because now you have an audit trail and the ability to see how your project's evolving. So even if I select on this room template, if I go to show log, what it's going to do now is it's going to show me the history of every change that has taken place in this room template since it was created. It's going to show me the fields that changed, old versus new value, when they changed, who changed them, and it gives you a summary of all of that. You can see that you can export these to Excel and to Word. So now at any point in a project, and you can select isolate specific periods of time or throughout the whole life of this room, I can run reports and I can see what changed when and why. This is really handy for user meetings during design because you see the ability to make notes. So if you're sitting in a user meeting and a user decides they want to change the requirements for a room, the template, you can make the change, you can make the notes here, you can export this to Word, and this can become a conference record. Again, we track everything that happens inside of your projects. All right, so with that, I'm going to jump into the Revit interface. So now inside of Revit, you'll see, as I mentioned, when you get the desktop application, you'll also get the dRofus plugin. The first thing I'm going to show you here is I'm going to go to the attribute configuration. And this is where we decide how dRofus is going to communicate with Revit. And basically, your BIM manager is, or you'll have a certain person, BIM manager, data manager, whoever the person may be, that's going to define all of these for the project team. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start by showing you the Revit room to dRofus room attribute configuration. So in here, you'll see we have all of the dRofus attributes on the top and on the left, and then on the right, we have all of the Revit parameters. Now these are Revit parameters, either out of the box, shared, project parameters. As long as they're associated with rooms, we have access to them. And on the top, we show you the ones that haven't been connected. And then on the bottom here, we show you your current configuration and which way the information is flowing. So you can see all of the data that we're writing to the model from dRofus and all the data we're writing to dRofus from the model. So in this case, we're pushing all of our finishes information, our department, program area, we're pushing that into Revit. But then on the Revit side, we're pushing our actual area of the room, the level of the building, the dimensional data, we're pushing back into dRofus. You can create multiple configurations. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the ways that teams start a dRofus project is they'll build a conceptual Revit model, and then they'll push fields of information from Revit into dRofus. You can have a configuration that does that, but then you can save that and create a different one that then pushes the data the other way. So you can create these multiple ways of supporting different workflows of how the data flows back and forth between dRofus and Revit. So I'm going to close that. The same holds true. You see that we work with Revit systems, families, areas. Again, I'm not going to show you any of those right now in the attribute configuration. They're all fairly similar. What I do want to show you, though, is a couple of the features of how we interact with Revit in both rooms and items. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom into this corner of the building. You can see we have a few rooms that haven't been placed yet. And oops. Okay, so now I'm inside of my architecture tab, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to place a room. And when I do that, we intercept the Revit room command, and we bring up our own dialog box. And you'll notice on the left is the functional program. So there's all of our departments, sub-departments, etc. And then inside of those, as you select the various departments, we will show you which rooms haven't been synchronized to a Revit room yet. So now, again, if you think about the different workflows, if you start building your program inside of dRofus before building Revit models, which in many cases may be the ideal, you now can make sure that every room you place inside of Revit is part of your program. So in this case, you could see that in the dental department, we have 3 rooms that haven't been placed yet. So I'm going to grab this room and I'm going to link it. And now when I do that, I'm going to close that. Uh-oh. Well, that's always fun. Don't you love a demo? There we go. Not sure what happened there. Okay, apologize for that little hiccup. I am using the beta version. Unfortunately, I shouldn't be, but that's what I have on my computer. But as you can see now, when I place that room, if I go ahead and select it and look at its properties, this is all the information that we said we're going to push into Revit from dRofus. Now, what I can also do is, if I go back to my dRofus tab, you'll see there's the properties palette here. And if I open that, now what I have is I have the Revit properties palette that shows me the Revit side, but then I also have the dRofus properties palette that shows me the information from dRofus, and it's showing me arrows that identify which direction the data is being pushed and pulled. So now as a user, I can see which fields of information are actually synchronized with my Revit or dRofus models, or my dRofus database to Revit. All right. So the other thing I'm going to show you here is if I select this room, and if I go to the dRofus interface, I'm going to select items in room. Now, when I select the items in room, what this does is this brings up a dialog, and remember that to be modeled checkbox? Any item that is selected to be modeled has been mapped to a Revit family, and now it's showing me the status of the design of this room. So you can see that here's the families. On the left side, it shows the Revit family. On the right side, it shows the dRofus item. And then it shows you the modeled versus plan counts and where we have discrepancies. So now you can really validate to make sure that the content inside of the models is actually meeting your design requirements. Now, again, we support multiple workflows. So you may have a workflow where I know a lot of teams that will actually sit when they're in the middle of user meetings and they'll have a live Revit model that they walk through. So if that's the case, you may have updated that Revit model, and in this case, we have 3 chairs instead of plan 2. It might have been an instance where the team decided they wanted to add a 3rd chair. So in that case, I can just hit Update dRofus, and it'll push a 3rd instance of that chair into dRofus. And oh, by the way, it will log that change. So now when I run a log, it'll see when that count changed. But on the other side, you may say, you know what? We've decided that dRofus is going to be the tool we're going to use to manage all of our programming through our user meetings. So maybe somebody didn't pick up a red line, or somebody accidentally put a 3rd chair in this room. I know that nobody ever has that problem with having people accidentally placing content in the wrong places. But in this case, we can say, you know what? The plan count is 2. We have 3. We want to update the model. So I'm going to go ahead and update the model, and you'll see that we actually removed that chair from the room. We resynchronize the databases, and now we show you that your modeled count matches your plan count. Similarly, we can actually place the content as well. So if I go to this room, for instance, and if I go to items in room, you'll see that we have, this chair, we have 1 planned and we don't have any in the room. So I can actually go ahead and place it, and I will place that chair inside of the room, and then it will basically do the same thing where it will synchronize the 2 databases, and now it's going to show me that our model count matches our plan count. Obviously, the chair doesn't belong there, but I can move it once it's placed. So now this is a very powerful way to make sure that you're validating that what is required for your project is inside of your rooms. This can also be done. I did the items in room for that room. You can see we can run this check across each level of a project or across the entire model. I'm not going to do it right now because it will take a few minutes, but basically you can just do what I did, and you can run it across the entire floor of a model, and you can export that to Excel. So there's a lot of ways that you can access and validate the information. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump back into dRofus. Because speaking about reports, I'm actually going to now go ahead and open up our reports module. So inside of the reports module, I mean, this is great. We're capturing all this information inside of dRofus. But what if I need to report it out? We offer the ability to create a lot of different types of reports. We have a lot of out-of-the-box reports in PDF, Excel, and Word format, but you can also create your own custom reports for your project in any one of these cases. But I'm going to go to my PDF reports for rooms. Very common one is creating room data sheets. And if I basically go to my PDF for room data sheets, if I go to my room function number, and actually let me just go ahead, I'll go to room function, and I'm going to grab my dental department, for instance. I'm going to select OK, and I'm going to generate this. So now you'll see that we are running this PDF report, and let's see how quickly this moves. All right, so ran a 103-page PDF report in maybe 5 seconds. I'm going to actually open up a page of this that has been isolated so we could talk a little bit more about it. So this is that out-of-the-box room data sheet. So in this case, you'll see at the very top, if I zoom in a little bit, there's all of our core information about the room, the programmed area, the actual area, etc. Each one of these headings in the room data sheet is the various tabs that were inside of that room data interface, and all the fields of information we were populating are now captured inside of your room data report, your room data sheet. So you can see here's our windows and doors, plumbing, etc., HVAC. But not only do we capture all the room data requirements, but we can also capture your images. So there is that floor plan image, as well as the design standard for that room. So your room data sheets now can become these very powerful tools that are tracking all the room requirements, as well as the graphics for the rooms. Here's an example of a customization, because you can customize these room data sheets. This is a sample from Stantec. You can see that they kind of inserted some of their branding and how they wanted their floor plans to look. So there's all of their room data. In addition to all the room data, you can see on the bottom here, this FF&E, and the next page FF&E, you can actually embed your equipment lists inside of your room data sheets. So now I can print out a room data sheet that shows me all of my design requirements. It could show me my floor plan layout, as well as all the equipment plan for that room. Again, there's various ways you can customize these. This is a really long one for a mega project in the Middle East. But what's interesting about this is they almost use these as like to supplement construction documents. So there's a floor plan, ceiling plan. Those images we create for you, but in this case, they also chose to embed interior elevations and axonometrics. These are all views inside of Revit. So you basically can create them, apply view templates, annotate them just like you would any Revit view. The next time you synchronize and run the report, it's going to give you an updated version. So these are basically can be live representations of how the Revit model is evolving. So all of the annotations and tags inside of this room data sheet, these are actually coming out of the Revit model. And if those families are synchronized with the dRofus items, you now know that all of your annotations are correct. In addition to the room data sheets, we also have the ability to create FF&E specifications. As I showed you, the ability to attach images like that CAT scan. You can attach images to your items, and you can run FF&E specs. You can also run finish specs. So there's a lot of different ways that you can run different PDF reports. In addition to the PDF reporting ability, we also have the ability to export to Excel. I told you how we can import, but we can also export to Excel. So in this case, this is a custom report that was a space utilization summary. This was for an airport project, and basically they were tracking how the space utilization was evolving across all the departments throughout the life of the project. Basically, the way that this works is that you have your data tab. This is the raw information that comes out of dRofus. Once you get this information and you decide which fields of which attributes you want to extract, then you can create as many tabs of different reports, pivot tables, charts, and graphs that you want to create custom project reports. When you have this formatted the way you want, you can save this Excel file back to the project. The next time we run it, all we do is we refresh the data, and it just updates all of the data inside of your pivot tables, etc. So this becomes a real efficient way to standardize reporting. We also have some clients that are starting to leverage tools like Tableau or Power BI to do some pretty cool data visualizations. Essentially, all you have to do is do your Excel export, create the connection to Power BI, and then you can just refresh the data. So that's a little bit of a summary of creating different reports inside of dRofus. One other thing I want to jump into inside of dRofus before I show you the web interface is I'm going to go back to my rooms module. And inside of my rooms module, let me close a couple things down here. I'm going to open up my IFC viewer. We have an IFC viewer directly inside of dRofus. And inside of this is basically a way to now aggregate models from various sources. So most teams work in Revit anymore, but if you have a consultant that's using a different file platform authoring tool, we can aggregate IFCs from all different design softwares or construction softwares. So in this case, you see this is the IFC of this Revit model. As I select different departments, it's going to highlight the departments inside of the IFC. If I go ahead and I select a room, it's going to highlight the room directly. If I double click on the room, it will take me there. So now I'm seeing the IFC version of the Revit model directly inside of dRofus. So now again, the ability to visualize what's happening inside of the models without actually having to open up an authoring platform. And then if I select on this occurrence tab for this room, it's similar to showing me the items in room inside of Revit. It's now showing me the same information, but on the dRofus side. So it's showing me where items are synchronized, the items that are not synchronized. So we give you the ability to view that on both sides of the equation. So we feel that's a pretty powerful tool for the non-Revit users. Last thing I'm going to do is, I guess the one thing I should mention here is there's a lot of information that you're seeing here, and some of you might be thinking, wow, this is really overwhelming. It can be, but one of the things that you can do is we have an admin console, an admin web console where you create your users. But in addition to creating users, you can create permissions and what people have access to edit and view. So because I'm demoing this, I'm showing you everything, but I can actually turn these various features on and off. So if a user only has a specific role on a project, I can turn off the modules so they don't even see these modules when they log in. And then as far as like the room data, for instance, I can also set it up so that users can only see specific pieces of room data. As a matter of fact, I think if I open this room, so you can see here under view filters, we can create filters for the various roles. So in this case, if I go to the engineer's view filter, now I'm only going to see the tabs that are for engineering. So again, this can all be set up in the admin console. So when your users log in, they're not overwhelmed with information they don't need to interact with. All right. So the last thing I want to do here is I'm going to jump into the web viewer. So the web viewer is constantly evolving. And we're going to see some more enhancements throughout the course of this year. But basically, when you log into the web viewer, the home screen for the web is very similar to the home screen of the client. You can just see some general project statistics. But if I go ahead and I open up the rooms module inside of the web viewer, I now have the ability to say, okay, well, I want to take a look as an observer. I want to go to that same dental department. Let's pick on our dental department again. I'm going to go to that supervisor's office. And when I go to that supervisor's office, it's now going to show me all of that room core information. It's going to show me the items that are currently planned for the room. It's also going to show me the images. Oh, that's an ugly one. Let's go to a different one. Yep. So it's going to show me the images. You can also see that I have the log history here as well. So inside of the web viewer, for the team members that don't necessarily need to edit the information but need to view it, this is a great way for them to be able to access the project directly inside of the web viewer. You see the ability to copy link to a clipboard. So for this particular room, if I had a concern about it, I could come on down here up and under my notes, I can make some comments about my thoughts on this room, and then I can select the copy to link to clipboard, and I can email that to another team member so they can open it inside of the client, see what changes need to be made, and make those changes. The same holds true for items, etc. So we've got all of the various modules accessible throughout the web viewer. All right. What I want to do here real quickly is I want to wrap up for those of you that are on the call that have interest in, okay, so this is all great with this design information, but what can we do with it downstream? Because we support this idea of managing the information of a project throughout the life cycle, we can connect to facility and asset management platforms. We are not an FM platform ourselves, but we can be the connection between the design information and then the long-term management of the facilities. The most basic way to do that, as I showed you, was through our the ability to import and export Excel. So we can do that through a structured data export through Excel, but we also have an open API. So we do have the ability to actually create direct connections to these FM platforms. There's a couple of them that we are currently connected to in Europe, but if there is a need, we have the ability to talk directly to FM platforms. One of the benefits of dRofus, we have the ability to create what we refer to as a flexible structured data. So all of the information that you're capturing inside of dRofus, you can map any attribute you want to custom data fields that you create for standardizing exports. So in the case of COBie, you can create a series of COBie export fields, and those can be mapped to whatever fields are the correct field based on an owner's requirement for that particular project. So you could standardize your ability to create a COBie export or COBie deliverable, but then that allows you the ability to map those fields to whatever attribute inside of that dRofus project is the attribute that that specific owner or client of yours wants. So it now becomes this very powerful tool. I know COBie is becoming a very popular request for data handover. So this becomes a very powerful way where now inside of dRofus, you can map all of these various attributes from the various aspects of your dRofus project to COBie. And really the way that this ultimately works with this kind of data collection is, again, any team member on the project has access to the shared data inside of dRofus. Even those team members may not be able to access the Revit models. And then through our attribute configuration and the synchronization with Revit, we allow all the team members, contractors, trade contractors, designers, planners, owners to basically collaborate and add their information as it's known inside of dRofus. We synchronize that with the Revit models, and then the actual handover in the case of COBie, for instance, would come directly out of dRofus, and you know that it's validated and synchronized with your Revit models. So ultimately, you can create a true record model or a true data deliverable. So just real quick summary here. Throughout the project lifecycle, I'm not going to read these all to you, but I hope that the demonstration I gave today kind of touches on some of these, and some of the benefits that you can see during the early design or early planning phase of the project. I mean, I think really what's powerful is the ability to ensure that design meets requirements. And it doesn't have to be done inside of a model, but it's done inside of a collaborative database. Once we move into design, and you can really start to leverage the dRofus data along with your Revit models, this is where you now can start to see the power of making sure that what's in the models is what's supposed to be in models. This becomes a very valuable tool to make sure that projects aren't creeping out of scope. The cost isn't getting out of control because models have too much information in them or too many families where they weren't supposed to be planned. So it gives you the ability to do that validation during design. During the build phase, basically we see some examples of Walsh Construction as one, for instance, where they're actually using customized room data sheets in construction to create punch lists. So they actually tape paper punch lists to all the doors in the rooms that are room data sheets that they use for the whole design and construction team to sign off on punch listing. So there's really a downstream value to all this information during construction, because now you can validate that what is being built is what was planned. And then finally on the manager operations side, because of our ability to create these structured data exports to really match any type of data requirements, we now can become a solution that is your ability, that supports your ability to define your project requirements at design, validate that all the way through construction, and then provide a true data deliverable at handover. And with that, we have a few minutes left. I guess I'll pause and see if there were any questions that were thrown into the chat, or if there are any questions.
Hi, David. There actually wasn't many questions in the chat, but if you could bring up that PDF about
Yes.
our upcoming event.
Yes, I can.
Great, thank you. So for those of you located in the...
That's not it. Sorry.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
In the Toronto area, we're actually hosting an event on June the 13th. David is flying into Toronto. It's a lunch and learn on dRofus, so you'll see some of the stuff he's shown now, but he's also going to be presenting some case studies as to how people are using the product. And then actually the next day on June the 14th, David's flying to Calgary to be part of the CanBIM session in our booth. So for those of you in the Alberta region who are going to be attending CanBIM in Calgary, you'll be able to meet David there and ask him some more questions. So at this point, it'll be the end of the webinar. David, thank you very much. That was a fantastic overview of dRofus. I'm sure those attending got a good understanding of the product's capabilities. And for those of you who want more information on dRofus, please contact SolidCAD. And a lot of this information about our events are located on our website as well. Is there anything else you'd like to add, David, before we sign off?
No, that's it. I just thank everybody for their time, and I hope this was informative.
Great. Thank you again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.